Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast. The podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't escaped your notice that, there was a pandemic for a while there, and now grocery prices are going up and up and up, and one of the listener questions that I had recently was all about how to save money on unprocessed, real, whole foods. Now, I have quite a lot of tips to give you, but I also asked the followers of the Life After Sugar Facebook page and Instagram, as well as the members of the After Sugar Club, for their tips. So I'll be sharing those in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources about cutting sugar, and also about cravings and how to get rid of them, then download my 5 tips for getting rid of cravings, especially if you're an intermittent faster and you realize that sugar's getting in the way of making your intermittent fasting lifestyle easy and natural. Then go to aftersugarclub.com and download your 5 tips for getting rid of cravings there. You can also get more free tips and insights on the Life After Sugar Facebook page, the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, and come and subscribe to my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, where I post pictures of what I eat, what I do, and sometimes pictures of our cat Gaston, so that you can see that it's totally possible to live a fun and active life even if you don't eat sugar. Okay, so I'm going to start off by giving you some of my thoughts about wasting money on sugar and processed foods. Yes, I said wasting money because ultra-processed foods make up about 80% of what's on our supermarket shelves, and most of them are pretty cheap at the checkout. And what I mean by ultra-processed foods are all the pre-packaged and industrially created food products that include all kinds of added ingredients and food additives, including sugar, that improve palatability, as well as processed or highly refined additives like hydrogenated fats, modified starches, refined seed oils, as well as some pretty dubious ingredients that are rarely used in home cooking, ingredients such as soy protein or mechanically separated meat or modified milk solids. All of these ultra-processed foods are mainly of industrial origin and are mass-created with all these dubious ingredients to be as cheap as possible for the greatest profit possible. And I'm not talking about relatively minimally processed foods like cheese or mustard or olive oil or even canned fish like tuna. I'm talking about ultra-processed foods and drinks like all those carbonated soft drinks, energy drinks, those sugary coffee drinks, fruit punches, especially the ones with health claims on the packaging, including ones like no added sugars or low in sugar. I mean, there's a huge amount of money invested in packaging, graphics, colors, misleading health claims, nutrition labels, and advertising. All of these we, the consumers, are actually paying for instead of buying whole foods that don't need packaging and health claims because they're naturally good for you. And can you imagine how much money you'd save if you weren't buying all those sweet and savory snacks like chips, brownies, crackers, cookies and cakes, pastries, including all those sweetened breakfast cereals and breakfast bars and shakes that are made to look healthy. And then there's all the frozen meals like pizza, TV dinners, fish sticks, reconstituted meat products like chicken nuggets, hot dogs, and processed meats, and even the more recent plant-based processed products. And let's not forget those spreads, including margarine, which is an incredibly processed product, full of refined seed oils, even the ones that are marketed as being heart healthy or made with olive oil. It's all marketing. Now look, I'm not saying that I never used to consume these products. I definitely did. But when I stopped eating most processed foods back in July 2015, it actually gave me the opportunity to educate myself and to become a smarter consumer. And you may find this too. As you replace processed foods with more whole foods, you may also get to a place where buying ultra-processed foods made with sugar and flour and all those other additives may actually feel like a waste of money because they're actually engineered, manufactured to make you want to eat more and, of course, buy more. They're not made to actually nourish you or fill you up. They're made for you to crave them. Because even if all those processed products that pass for food are cheap at the checkout, they actually have a much higher price because our dependency on them, this craving that we have for sugar, for processed foods, for fast foods, that type of relationship with those types of foods is an unhealthy relationship. An unhealthy relationship that the food manufacturers themselves have spent millions and millions of dollars manufacturing and selling to us. And in the long run, all the money that we spend on these types of fast foods, convenience foods, and processed foods is, in my humble opinion, a waste of money. Because in the long run, sugar and processed foods are ruining not just our health, but our relationship with food. But when I was growing up in England in the 70s and 80s, we were in no position to waste money. But here's the thing. My mum worked full-time and she didn't necessarily have the time or energy left over to make meals from scratch. And although I don't have memories of eating TV dinners or frozen pre-packaged meals, we did resort to convenience foods quite often just because of our lifestyle. My mum certainly didn't have any money to waste on convenience foods, but she also had very little time at the end of a long working day to make meals from scratch with fresh ingredients, especially as she was all on her own doing the cooking. And when I left home and went to university and got an apartment, well, I didn't have much money, and naturally I chose the cheapest foods I could find. I pretty much lived off pasta and toast most of my university years, and that was out of necessity too. I certainly wasn't looking to waste money, and I certainly didn't think that I was eating that much sugar, even if processed foods like pasta and bread were the basis of my diet. And what did I do when I wanted to treat myself? Well, I ate cookies or chocolate or sweets and candies. And I certainly didn't see that as a waste of money. And then when I became a mother, years later, and I also was working full-time, well, I'd swing by to get a frozen lasagna or a boxed pizza or some other kind of pre-made meal several times a week, not because I didn't want to feed my family good food. Of course I did. But I just didn't have the time or the energy or, quite frankly, the inclination or the imagination, let alone the knowledge or the budget, to make meals with fresh whole ingredients. And it was only when I cut sugar back in July 2015 that I was able to step back from what I'd always done and what I'd always known and start thinking about, well, what foods are left to eat when you're not eating products that are made with sugar and flour? Because all the highly processed, highly palatable foods that include sugar and refined flour in their ingredients also happen to be, well, pretty devoid of any nutritional value. And really, however cheap they may seem, I think as consumers, we're actually paying money not only for food that just isn't nutritious, but also for food that can actually make us sick. Why would we be paying for that? And believe me, I'm not trying to guilt trip myself or you about how prevalent processed food products are in our Western society. No guilt trip here. But I do think that our power as consumers lies in our ability to become more aware and to change our habits for the better, so that we're not so dependent on big food. In other words, the processed foods industry. In fact, I was recently reading an article from the University of Alberta in Canada that starts out like this. Imagine if the real cost to society of the food you buy at the grocery store was built right into each product's price. Everything with added sugar would cost a whole lot more. And this is according to the University of Alberta researchers in a new study in the Canadian Journal of Public Health. They peg the economic burden of excessive sugar consumption in Canada at $5 billion a year, thanks to the direct and indirect costs related to 16 chronic diseases. And some of those chronic diseases that are linked to sugar, or at least an excess of added sugars, are higher blood pressure, inflammation, weight gain, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, an increased risk for heart attack and stroke, and even cognitive decline and some cancers. Does that mean that sugar absolutely causes these chronic or metabolic diseases? No, it's not necessarily a causal relationship, but there's plenty of current evidence to show that an excess of added sugars, especially in processed foods, is closely linked to metabolically based diseases such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. And certainly there's lots of high-quality evidence that eating added sugars and refined grains is very unlikely to yield health benefits, despite what the processed foods industry would like to have you believe on their packaging. So yeah, when I stopped eating most processed foods, especially those that include added refined sugars and flours in their list of ingredients, I had the chance to step back and think about why I would want to buy products that A, don't nourish me, and B, have the potential to make me sick, or at the very least, cause cravings and weight gain. I mean, however cheap these products are, the conclusion I came to was that I was paying to, well, ruin my health, really. Am I saying that we should all stop buying and eating these foods completely? No, definitely not. And if I was going to point any fingers here, it wouldn't be at us, the consumers. It would be at the processed foods industry, and in many ways at the diet culture, and even at some nutritionists and dietitians whose message is very often that these highly processed foods, including sugary treats in air quotes, are a normal, healthy, necessary part of our diet, and we should be able to eat them in moderation. Otherwise, the message goes, we'd feel restricted. And everyone needs some joy in their life, right? Well, I 100% agree that we all need more joy in our lives. It just doesn't need to come from refined sugar and flour and it certainly doesn't need to come from the processed foods industry. So despite all those messages to the contrary, here's what I think. I think that the price that we as consumers pay when we buy these cheap foods, that price is actually much higher than what's on your grocery or takeout bill. Just before we continue with more tips for saving money on whole foods, I wanted to thank you for listening to this podcast. And if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so happy you've discovered this podcast, and I hope that it will inspire you to take one more step towards your life after sugar. And I'd be so grateful if you could rate and review the podcast. Just scroll down and tap on the stars to rate it. In fact, here's 3 reviews, one from Canada, one from the States, and one from the UK. This one from Canada says, I love Netta's podcast. The stories of the different individuals who have found their way to a sugar-free lifestyle are very honest and relatable. Netta asks great questions and has an upbeat and flexible style. Plus, it's great to hear content from a fellow Canadian. Thank you for all your hard work, Netta. And thank you for that lovely review. And this one that says, this podcast inspired me to quit sugar. And it continues, I'd been toying with the idea of quitting sugar for a long time, but I didn't do it until I started listening to this podcast. I like hearing the interviews with people that have all sorts of different experiences quitting sugar. It was easier than I thought to quit sugar, and my life has improved tremendously as a result. Thank you, Netta. Well, thank you, Lucy, for taking the time to write your review. And from the UK, great podcast. Only just discovered this podcast and can recommend it for anyone in a sugar-free plan or who wants to learn about it. Always supportive with personal stories from people living the lifestyle. I like how it's never preachy and acknowledged that different approaches to being sugar-free suit different people. Thank you, Serafina from the UK. And if you want to add your review, go to the podcast player where you're listening to this podcast, scroll down and tap on Write a Review. And let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews and I really take them to heart. It really inspires me to continue with this podcast. Okay, so if we are not buying all those cheap, highly processed, highly palatable and completely non-nutritious food products, then what else is left to eat? That's why when I was prepping this podcast episode, I asked the question on the Life After Sugar Facebook page and on my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar and in the After Sugar Club to get your tips for how to save money, especially in this post-COVID era, on real, whole, nutritious and delicious foods that fill you up, give you energy, and don't have the potential to make you put on weight or make you sick. Whether you're carnivore, vegan, keto, gluten intolerant, low carb, an intermittent faster, or anything in between, these are some fantastic tips. So Joan from the After Sugar Club says, I shop at Aldi in the United States for most veggies, and I try to shop thoughtfully in that I make a plan of what I need so nothing goes to waste. It doesn't always happen with just 2 of us in the house. I find just not buying processed foods, I save money. In fact, Joan was telling us recently that she was looking at all the great deals at Costco this month and got to see all the money she wouldn't have to spend on all those snack foods. Excellent tips there from Joan and an excellent reframe. And I just wanted to add that because time is money and most of us are busy and could do with a few time-saving tips, when you stick to the perimeter of a grocery store, which is where most of the whole foods are, then you're likely to do your grocery shopping much faster, especially when you don't waste time and money in the central aisles where most of the highly processed products are. And Wendy, who's an After Sugar Club member in England, says, "It's so easy to prepare and cook more than you need. Pop them in a box in the fridge and you have the base for tomorrow's meals." Batch cooking like this definitely saves more money and more time because you're not preparing everything from scratch every single day. You can roast a load of veg and keep half for whizzing up for soup the next day. Carrots, squash, sweet potato, leeks, red lentils and a bit of creamed coconut plus stock for the soup, and you have a filling, nourishing meal. You can also roast the veg with herbs and spices for extra nutrition and flavour, says Wendy. And Wendy continues, fresh made sauces will also keep in the fridge or freezer. Make a fresh batch of salad and keep half in a box. Or keep bags of frozen berries in the freezer. You can take 1 bag of frozen raspberries, thawed out, and divide it between 4 glasses. Add a dessert spoon of chia seeds to each one. Mix well. Let it stand for a couple of hours. Add a dollop of Greek yogurt or coconut milk to each glass before serving. And you have a chia pudding. Cheap and free of added sugars. And another tip from Wendy, cook a batch of beans, preferably in a pressure cooker, and you can divide it up into what you eat today and what you keep for in a couple of days' time. And Wendy's right that when you have something ready to eat, it not only saves time and money, but it makes it much easier to stick to being sugar-free. And I have some more great money-saving tips for you from the Life After Sugar Facebook page. For example, from Megan, whose tip is to prep meals ahead and freeze them to reduce waste, which is also a great way to save time. And from Karen, who says that she shops from the Dirty Dozen list and buys either fresh fruit and freezes it herself, or she buys frozen fruit. The Dirty Dozen, by the way, are fruits and vegetables that you may be better off buying organic so that you ingest less pesticides. The 2022 Dirty Dozen list includes strawberries, spinach, kale, collard and mustard greens, nectarines, apples, grapes, bell and hot peppers, cherries, peaches, pears, celery and tomatoes. And from Carrie, she says that many communities have CSAs, which are essentially farms which put together boxes of veggies and produce that they grow on their farm. The farmer then drives these boxes to a designated location and people pick up their boxes. Usually you pay per season and you save money because the middleman is eliminated. Also, the advantage is that this gets you to try different kinds and varieties of produce because you don't get to pick what's in your box. I've had this service before in my teeny out-of-the-way town, and it's a really great way to discover new fruits and vegetables, and because they're in season, they tend to be cheaper and local. And here's a tip from Joanne, who says that she uses a company called Flash Food, which sells food in the superstore that only has a few days left. And she says they also have fruit and veggie boxes for $5. And she also shops the 50% use tonight sales. I do this too, Joanne, and that helps me to decide what to cook for dinner that night. And actually, one good thing that came out of the pandemic was that we got used to more online grocery shopping, and getting your groceries online and having them delivered to your house can save you money and time. And Amy's money-saving tip is to plan a weekly or multi-day menu and only purchase what you need. And because the cost of herbs can add up, she said to buy the plant if it's a herb you use a lot. And any uncooked fruits or vegetables, freeze them. And from Jacinta, she said buying loose fruit and vegetables rather than pre-packaged is better for the wallet and the environment. And from Rabia, she says, buy stuff that's in season. And Rabia also says that in the UK, they have an app called Olio, O-L-I-O, and it's about reducing food waste. And although they also have processed foods on there, fresh foods are also available, and they're all short dated, but if you're not too fussy about the use by dates, you can pick up quite a few bargains on the app. And the money-saving tip from Molly is to grow your own. And from Claire, she says that Superstore has no-name produce and sometimes misshapen as well, and both are easier on your wallet. And Kathy's money-saving tips are to first buy in season, second to check the last chance cart at the back of the store because they have great prices for ripe fruits and vegetables, and she says that she can find organic produce for less than the cost of conventional there sometimes. Number 3, says Kathy, buy in bulk when on sale and turn it into meals to freeze. And tip number 4 to save money, resuscitate abandoned vegetables from the back of the fridge by cutting them up and keeping in cold water in the fridge. And finally, tip number 5 from Kathy, and thank you Kathy, is to check the flyers for what is on sale at the local grocery stores. That's how I make my grocery list. I use an app that tells me the store specials in my town, and then I plan my meals according to what's on special offer, and I save money that way. I'm not actually the greatest at meal planning, but I do enjoy going on a grocery app and making my list that way, and it does actually save me a lot of time. It helps me not to do my food shopping according to impulse buys, or be in a situation where I have nothing planned and I have to resort to takeout or something ready-made by the food industry. That's what I used to do when I didn't really know how to meal plan. And if your family includes meat eaters like mine does, then you've probably noticed that the price of meat has gone up, so buying cheaper cuts of meats, either at the grocery store or at a butcher, is a really good way to save some money on your weekly grocery shopping. Some types of meats are cheaper than others, like chicken legs, whole chicken, ground beef, pork chops with the bone in, and you can also get beef chuck or shank, which is from the lower leg, or brisket, or round, which is from the cow's rear leg. All of these cuts are great for the crock pot or for slow cooking for either a beef stew recipe or a slow-cooked roast or even spaghetti sauce or chili. And I love my slow cooker because I just throw something in the morning and it's ready when we get home at night. So that's also a great time saver. And when you see meat on special offer, then it's a good idea to buy in bulk and to freeze it or batch cook recipes and then freeze those recipes in individual or family-sized portions for a later date. I do this with butter, for example. I buy several blocks of butter at a time when I see it on special offer and keep the extra in the freezer. Or if there's a special offer on eggs in a given week, then I'll buy extra and make recipes that call for a lot of eggs. Or I boil up a dozen hard-boiled eggs, and they're ready to grab and go as a quick breakfast in the morning. Cheap and fast. And if your whole food's plant-based, you can replace meat with other plant-based sources of proteins that are less expensive. And if you do buy grains, LDS Home Storage Center, which has locations around North America, is where you can buy pre-canned number 10 can-size grains like whole wheat berries, oatmeal, and rice, says my friend Wendy. And she also says that for fruits and veggies, she looks on Facebook Marketplace for home gardeners who are selling extras. And if you have skills in making your own canned foods, then you can can your own fruit and vegetables and even can ground beef. And for everything probiotic and fermented, I save money by making them myself. And that's also what I teach inside of the After Sugar Club. How to make your own kombucha, how to make your own water kefir, how to make your own fermented veggies like sauerkraut and kimchi, and how to make your own yogurt and milk kefir. I calculate that it costs about 1/10 of the store price to make your own. Really, a litre of my homemade kombucha costs just a few cents, and in the store it can cost up to $10. And just to finish this episode, here are a few more money-saving tips that my listeners have shared with me. Buy things when they're in season. Where I live, we have you-pick strawberries, blueberries, peaches, oranges, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, onions, and collard greens. And also, buy from local roadside stands. I love this tip, and I have to admit that I'm a little bit jealous of all of you who live in slightly warmer climates than where I am in northeastern Canada, where we have snow on the ground for 6 months a year. So if you do have all that fresh produce year-round, make the most of it. And saving money doesn't mean that you never go out to a restaurant or that you have to deprive yourself of yummy food. It just means that when we're not letting the processed foods industry determine what we're eating, we can actually save more money by either growing our own food or preparing yummy recipes from whole real foods so that we are no longer dependent on industrially concocted, engineered food products. Oh, and one other thing. Do you know what the biggest money-saving tip I have for you is? Intermittent fasting. Because when you cut sugar and focus on real, whole, nutritious, filling foods, the magic of intermittent fasting happens where you become less hungry less often. You don't necessarily eat less. I mean, it's not like those weight loss diets, but you may find cutting sugar results in easy and natural intermittent fasting, and when you're fasting, you're not snacking all the time. So you save lots of money on all those processed snack foods, and you can even use all that saved money for buying better quality ingredients, and who knows, you might become a whole food foodie like me. So I hope these money-saving tips have been helpful for you, and you can get lots more free tips on the Life After Sugar Facebook page and on my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, as well as the Life After Sugar YouTube channel. And head on over to my website aftersugarclub.com, where you'll find even more tips for what to eat that doesn't contain added sugars, for where to find real whole foods in the grocery store, and about why fermented probiotic foods are so important for your gut health and your general health. So with all the tips that you heard in this episode, my biggest tip for you is that when you stop wasting money on products that contain refined sugar or refined flour, products that don't nourish you, probably give you cravings, and probably stimulate your hunger so that you want to eat even more, not just the sweet things, but all those pre-packaged, highly processed, hyper-palatable, edible food-like substances, as Michael Pollan calls them, all of them engineered by the food industry to resemble food, but to act on your brain and your appetite so that you just crave them and want more and more and more. If you're anything like me, you grew up in the diet culture where these types of pre-packaged processed food products have been marketed to you as being a normal part of your diet and even good for you. So as consumers, it requires of us a really big mindset shift to re-evaluate our definition of what food actually is. And this is the last money-saving tip I have for you, and it concerns your mindset. It's not necessarily easy to do, but when we make that reframe to see food as a delicious way of getting energy and feeling full and satisfied, rather than as an emotional crutch or a way to get entertainment when we're bored or smother our real needs, then in my experience, it really helps to redefine not just what food is, but why we would want to exclude the industrially created food products from our plate. And this type of positive reframe can prevent you from feeling restricted or deprived, because if you're actually excluding the food products that could make you have cravings or even get sick in the long run, then really you're not depriving yourself of anything except, well, a whole bunch of health problems. And really, do we actually want to pay to get sick? But you know, all this, I realize, is easier said than done, which is why I created the After Sugar Club, so that you can get the support, the guidance, and the accountability that you need to turn all this knowledge into action. If you grew up in the diet culture that made you feel like a failure, and you're worried that you'll fail at this too, or you're struggling with health issues like diabetes or extra weight, or aches and pains and inflammation, bloating, digestive issues, and you know that cutting sugar can help reduce so many health problems and make your intermittent fasting lifestyle a whole lot easier, the After Sugar Club is for you. That's where you'll get encouragement, support, and accountability so that you can finally break your sugar habit for good and live a healthier, joyful life without needing or missing sugar anymore. In fact, in the After Sugar Club, we focus on your relationship with yourself and with food, especially with sugar and all those highly processed comfort foods. If sugar's always been a coping mechanism for dealing with your emotional needs, we get it. All the Sugar Club members have been there. And in the After Sugar Club, you'll get tools and tips to find healthier coping skills and habits for self-care so that you don't need sugar anymore. And in the After Sugar Club, you'll also get guidance to break free from the diet culture. There are no rules to break, no guilt, and no need to be perfect. And actually, perfectionism is not required to live a happy, sugar-free life. So, if you're ready and motivated to invest in yourself and in your well-being, and to discover the real sweetness in your life, sign up for the After Sugar Club today. Go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button, Join the Club. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.